Well, welcome everybody to Westcliff University's Distinguished Innovator Speaker Series. And our first speaker of the 2022 spring lineup here on the last day of Women's History Month, Gina Osborn. Gina is a woman who I respectfully call a genuine James Bond in heels. She runs a very popular podcast called Lead Like a Lady. We'll get into that. Gina has successfully paved her own path in male-dominated sectors of law enforcement and has a great deal to share with us, including what many might consider a unique slant on feminism. Again, we'll get into that very shortly. I'm Dr. Barry Sandrew, Director of Entrepreneurship at Westcliff and your moderator. I'm very happy we're all able to join us this morning. We'll get to Gina in just a moment. But first, I want to briefly introduce Westcliff University to those in the webinar audience who might not be familiar with the institution. Pictured here is our campus in Irvine, California. Westcliff is an accredited private institution of higher learning with over 4,100 students enrolled both live, synchronous, online, and on campus. There are 4 colleges. The College of Business offers bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in business administration. The College of Education offers a BA, a master's in teaching English as a second language, the Real Intensive English program. The College of Law offers the Juris Doctoral degree. And the College of Technology and Engineering offers BS and MS degrees in IT, an MS degree in computer science, and an MS degree in engineering management. We also offer a full stack coding bootcamp certificate and a cybersecurity bootcamp certificate. And now for our guest. Gina began her career in 1986 in the US Army as a counterintelligence special agent. She served 6 years during the Cold War, working some of the highest profile espionage cases in the European theater. She was there when the Berlin Wall came down. Matter of fact, that was about 2 years after she started. 1996, Gina became a special agent with the FBI. She had many assignments over the years, including investigating Asian organized crime in the Little Saigon district of Orange County here in California, and supervising counterterrorism investigations in Southeast Asia. She was there during the Mumbai bombings in the Taj Hotel and also the Valentine Massacre in the Philippines. Gina also served 11 years as Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Cybersecurity and Computer Forensic programs in Los Angeles, where she led investigations relating to national security and criminal computer intrusions, like, for instance, the Sony hack by North Korea. Today, among many other things that keep her busy, she's a very popular blogger. We'll get into that shortly. She's also a CEO and organizational coach, invited lecturer and keynote speaker, sharing the lessons she's learned throughout her fascinating career and how organizations can effectively navigate through crisis, change, and chaos, and how to build teams to obtain peak performance. So on behalf of Westcliff, I want to really give Gina a very warm welcome. Thank you, Gina, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Sandrew. I'm happy to be here.
Let's not be formal. I'm Barry.
Hi, Barry.
Gina, I think the first question I have to ask is how did you ever get into law enforcement in the first place?
Well, I always wanted to be an international woman of intrigue. That was always something that absolutely fascinated me. It was back in the Cold War, so I was fascinated with anything relating to the CIA or the KGB, former Soviet Union. And so I decided, okay, so I want to work for the CIA. So all I needed was a 4-year degree and the sense of adventure that I already had. And in my second year of college, I was a cocktail waitress at a comedy club in Orange County. And I was going to Orange Coast College, and I sat it down at the library and someone came up to me and started telling me about the Army's counterintelligence program. And it was a total private Benjamin moment. They told me all about the condos and all the great things. I could live overseas, I could chase spies. And the next day I went down to the Army recruiter, and 8 months later, I was eating dirt as a private in at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Very interesting. And again, you were I think you were stationed in Belgium and in Germany, correct?
I was very, very fortunate. My first assignment was at the Supreme Command Allied, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. I did that for about 2.5 years. I was responsible for the US mission to NATO. And then when I moved to Germany, I was part of a specialized team that investigated the highest profile espionage cases in the European theater. This was back before the end of the Cold War. So it was just an absolutely fascinating time for a little over 3 years, where I was on the road about, I don't know, 9 or 10 months out of the year chasing spies. It was just a dream come true.
And I would imagine when the Berlin Wall came down, all those spies just flowed out, correct?
Yeah. And then we were a little confused as to what our mission was. And I got out in 1992. And that's when I decided I wound up not getting into the CIA, but the FBI took me in 1996. And that was what was supposed to happen. I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason. And
That's right.
I had an amazing career with the FBI for 22 years.
And it took you some time to do that because they weren't hiring, right? Correct.
Right. I sat through a 4-year hiring freeze. And, that was a really big moment because my whole purpose for being was to work for the CIA. And when I didn't get that, I definitely had to pivot and be open to whatever it is that I was supposed to be doing. And I stayed in shape after I quit feeling sorry for myself, of course, and really had to focus. Okay, if this isn't my direction, I need to find my direction. And I got in when the 4-year hiring freeze was over. The FBI put me into the academy, and at the time I was one of every 107 applications that went in. So fewer than 1% of the applicants during that time actually made it into Quantico.
And I think there were only 14% of women in the FBI at the time, right?
That's correct. And when I went to the Army, I think it was maybe less than 10% of the soldiers were women, and then the FBI, 14%.
Well, let's talk about Little Saigon, because I think, I get the impression that was probably a pinnacle thing for you because you learned everything there. That's really where you really got some traction. It must have been exciting.
It was very exciting. I was very, very fortunate to be able to be assigned in the FBI resident agency in Santa Ana, which was one city over from where I grew up. My first arrest in the FBI was across the street from the high school that I went to. I was on a counterintelligence squad, which made sense because I had all this great counterintelligence experience, but they also did civil rights. And so my supervisor came up to me and gave me this giant case file where Thai women were being brought into the United States and they were being forced into prostitution in a place called Little Saigon here in Orange County. And I'm like, I know absolutely nothing about Asian organized crime, Asian prostitution. I don't know anything about that. But in the case file, there was a newspaper article, and it was where a detective with the Westminster Police Department, which is in Little Saigon, or where Little Saigon is, and he had arrested a group of people for holding these Thai women hostage, basically. So I got into my powder blue Ford Taurus that used to conk out at every stoplight, and I went over to the Westminster Police Department. I showed my badge. I did not know that the chief of police at the Westminster Police Department hated the FBI. So they let me come in the first time and they gave me some information and they sent me out through the back door so the chief wouldn't catch me. But then the second time I went over there, the chief caught me. And he agreed for me to work one case with his detectives. And that turned into 5 years of working on this task force, working Asian organized crime in the basement of the Westminster Police Department.
And you put a guy by the name of Chung Van Dam in prison, I understand.
I did.
But not because of the servitude, the involuntary servitude, right?
No, because we couldn't find any of the girls to cooperate because they were afraid for their lives. Their families were at risk. And so we had to be a little creative when it came to the federal violation of it all. So I think we arrested Mr. Den about 2 or 3 times on state charges. And then I was able to get federal charges on him because he was using the illegal proceeds that he got received from the brothels, and he was mailing a check across state lines to pay the mortgage that he used the illegal proceeds for to use for that, buying his house. So yeah, we had to be a little bit creative, but yeah, not only did I take about 3 of his houses that he bought, he did some time as well.
Interesting. You also, well, first of all, I think Randy Pearson was your mentor there, correct?
Randy Parsons, yes.
Yeah, Parsons, yeah, I know you've mentioned him in the past because he was very important to you at that particular point in time. There was a lot of other things that were going on that were kind of interesting, like for instance, the gambling. They were doing
Yes.
gambling in little coffee houses and that sort of thing, right?
Yes. The interesting thing about Little Saigon back in the 90s, it was sort of the wild, wild west because a lot of the gangsters that were in Little Saigon, they came from Vietnam. And they knew that they could target the Vietnamese community because the Vietnamese community had a trust issue with law enforcement. So they would target their own communities.
Yeah.
So I worked everything from murder for hire to loan sharking. Gosh, we did Microsoft counterfeiting back in the day when you had the Microsoft CDs. We pretty much worked loan sharking, anything that came through the door. And I was the only FBI agent. I was the only woman on the team. And it was just a really great experience.
A 6-foot blonde must find it very difficult to be undercover in Saigon.
Yes,
In
I would
Little
just say,
Saigon.
yes, yes. When I was in Germany, I fit in a lot better. I did a lot of surveillances in Germany where I didn't go detected, but yeah, I was known. In fact, my partner, Tommy Ratcliffe, he was also a great role model and mentor for me. So we went out to arrest one of our gangsters in a Vietnamese cafe. And then he wasn't there. So we went back to the department, and then Tommy got a phone call and said, "Hey, why were you in the cafe?" And he said, "Well, how did you know it was us?" And the cafe owner said, "Well, my sister said it was the old guy and the blonde." So that's who we were. That's what we were known as, the old guy and the blonde back in the day.
I know that you've been promoting women getting into the FBI because there is a need. And, we've got a lot of incredibly bright and talented women here at Westcliff. And I was wondering you can't just leave college and go into the FBI, correct?
No, there's a requirement. You have to have a 3-year requirement of work experience. And the FBI is very, very competitive. Not only do you have to have a 4-year degree at a minimum, you have to have 3 years work experience. And what people don't know is that the FBI is a second career for the majority of the people going through. The average age going through the academy is 31 years old. So if you just got your degree and you had 3 years work experience, you're going to be competing with 36-year-olds who have been attorneys for the last 10 or 12 years. So it's very, very competitive to get in. But the beauty of the FBI is we take so many different types of people. I mean, in the class that I mentored back in 2016, we had a zookeeper, and in my class we had a woman who was an executive in retail. We had a couple of PhDs, we had stockbrokers. So really you have this massive amount of knowledge within the FBI. So when something like 9/11 happens and we have to pivot, because back before 9/11, organized crime was the #1 priority. And then after 9/11, terrorism became the #1 priority. So the FBI hires people who are going to be able to solve problems and learn something new in order to address the crime of the day.
And as a matter of fact, you mentioned 9/11. That's really what made you shift from Little Saigon to cyber?
No, back then it was the counterterrorism. Yes. So
counterterrorism.
after 9/11, I became the counterterrorism program coordinator for FBI Los Angeles. And then I was also in charge of a squad, the extraterritorial squad. So any terrorist attacks against US persons or US interests in Southeast Asia, Australia, or India, my squad would travel out and they would conduct those investigations. So it was really a fascinating time right after 9/11 to be working terrorism.
Yeah, and that's when the Mumbai thing and the Philippines thing came into play, correct?
Yeah, I think at the time I had 11 people on my squad, and 8 of the 11 had been in the country where the terrorist attack had happened. Whether we spent a lot of time in Jakarta, Indonesia, the Marriott bombing took place there. So yeah, my folks, I mean, they were first responders to a lot of the attacks that were taking place at that time.
Yeah. Just a little aside, I've listened to a number of your interviews, and I think it was Terry. Terry is one. I can't remember her last name. Maybe you could remember, but I love listening to you talk shop
Oh,
about the FBI. It's fascinating. By the way, there's a lot of law enforcement people, both current and retired, in this webinar right now. You really attracted them,
oh,
which is
good.
great.
Well,
Which is great.
hello, old friends.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to a young woman? I know you're heavily involved with the Girl Scouts. I mean, what advice would you give a young woman who wants to get into the FBI?
I would say follow your dream and go out, and a lot of people will ask me because they're interested, they want to be FBI agents. So they say, well, what should I study or what should I do? And I tell people, follow your passion, because that is something that's going to make you do really, really well on the FBI interview, because they ask things about leadership and experiences, and they want you to be able to articulate them. And if you're not passionate about what you do, you're not going to have a lot of things to talk about when it's time for you to present that to the FBI, trying to become an FBI agent. So I say follow your passion. It can be in anything. Cyber is a really big field right now, but really it can be in anything as long as you're really, really good at it, and as long as you have the characteristics that they're looking for. You have to be able to solve problems. You have to have good judgment, no criminal record, and all of that. So, but I say follow your passion and put in, because it's a long process. It could take probably a year and a half, up to a year and a half, or even more, to actually get through all of the things that you have to get through in order to be have a seat at Quantico.
I would imagine that STEM would be a good concentration for women, young women as well.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the youngest people in the class that I took through in 2016, they had cyber backgrounds, and cyber is a huge priority for the FBI right now.
Mhm. And watch your social media posts and activity, because they
Yes.
check it all, don't they?
Oh yeah, they do. And when you're, right, we hear about phishing all the time. I'm sure you're just like me, and you're the luckiest person in the world, where you're getting emails every day saying that you've won something or another, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely something that women should be interested in. And I'm on the board of directors for the Girl Scouts of Orange County, and they say that a girl will either go toward STEM or away from STEM by the 8th grade. So it's really important for parents to recognize that and encourage their girls to go in that direction. And I had a guest named Vlada Bortnik on my Lead Like a Lady podcast, and she created Marco Polo, which is a big app. And she talks about how she will encourage her children without them even knowing it, and talking about science and doing projects where the kids don't even realize that it's science, technology, engineering, or math.
How did you get into this cybersecurity, cyber terrorism part of this?
In order for us to promote to the executive levels for the FBI, we have to go back to the mothership, which is FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. So I had to do an 18-month tour there, and I was on the inspection staff. So the inspection staff will go out, back then it was every 2 weeks, and we would inspect field offices, all of their programs. It would be a top to bottom inspection to make sure that they were effective and efficient in the way they were doing things. So this was in, I think, 2004 that I started in this position. And none of the team leaders, I was a team leader, had any sort of technical experience. And so I just volunteered. I said, I'll do it. And it was an inspection in Chicago, and I learned so much. And just because I did it once and I volunteered, they kept giving me these cyber programs. And then before I knew it, I became the cyber program expert, even though I can barely turn on a computer and I still don't have the cyber skills. But it was just really understanding what we needed to do in order to be successful at our job. And that sort of kind of got me back to Los Angeles. And it was the first assistant special agent in charge position in the entire FBI over cyber and computer forensics. So I was really fortunate to be the first in that position and grow the program to be the biggest and brightest, if I do say so myself, cyber program in the FBI.
Well, let's go back for a second. When you first started, something that was very interesting about the FBI, that actually you went to actually audit the program. And so the FBI goes through a complete internal audit every year, and you were auditing the cybersecurity program, and that's really where you got the basically got involved, right?
Well, actually, I would be sent to different offices once a month for a 2-week period, and we would inspect cyber programs in the field offices. So that's how I learned about, how different offices were doing their cyber programs and working computer intrusions. And then I would go back to headquarters and I would brief the cyber division, the section chiefs and the assistant directors, and to let them know that these are the deficiencies that we found. So doing that, being out on the road for 18 months, seeing how all of the other divisions did their cyber programs, then I went back to Los Angeles and started to build a cyber empire out there.
And you were involved with the very first international cyber investigation, correct? With the Saudis?
Nope, I don't think I was. No, that wasn't our case in LA.
Oh, okay.
I can tell you about one of the first that we did. So there was an individual by the name of Louis Majongos, and he was part of the very first sextortion case that the FBI did. In fact, the agents who did the case in Los Angeles, they actually coined the term sextortion. So Majongos, he was a former gang member, paraplegic, and what he was doing was he was doing computer intrusions into young women's computers. And then he figured out how to turn the camera on their computers, and he would tape them in various stages of undress and other things that they were doing. Then he would use that information to get them to either send more pictures or do more videos, or else he would threaten to send the pictures that he took, the videos that he took, out to all of their social media friends. So that was a really interesting case. I think he probably got, back then, which was a lot, about 6 or 7 years in prison for doing that. But yeah, it was very frightening to the victims.
Regarding the Sony hack, how did you figure out it was the North Koreans? Right
Well,
away?
I'd like to say that I figured it out, but it wasn't me. It was this amazing team of cyber geniuses that I had the privilege of working with. They went out, the Sony Pictures hack, I think we found out on the Monday before Thanksgiving in 2014. And then it was just such a crazy investigation, because really it was the first time that the adversary used psychological warfare against the victim. So what North Korea did is they got into the system, completely shut it down, but they had exfiltrated everything, or the majority of everything that was on their networks. So every few days they would put out emails from the different executives in the company that were embarrassing. They would put out movie content. They would put out information, PII on the employees, so their social security numbers and birth dates and addresses. So it really wreaked havoc within the Sony Pictures as a result of the information, because they didn't know what was going to be going out and how they were supposed to deal with it. So my team, I think within probably about a week, or a little over a week, they were able to do all of the analysis that needed to take place to identify a signature on a piece of malware that came from North Korea. And that's how they were able to figure out. But the interesting thing about this case, what started it, was a movie called The Interview. And it was with Seth Rogen and James Franco. And it depicted the supreme leader of North Korea being killed at the end. I hope I didn't ruin it for anybody. It's kind of an old movie, but yeah, they didn't like that at all. And that's what stirred up and this entire thing. And it was, they were punishing them for putting that movie out.
Very cool. I understand that your department or your team basically, or someone set up a cyberhood watch, which I think is a fantastic idea. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So after the Sony hack and all of my resources, not only my resources in Los Angeles, but resources in other divisions across the country, FBI headquarters entities out of the cyber division, we were using legal attaches to help us overseas. And I just recognized during that, I thought, okay, I don't have the resources. If I get another similar attack, or if I even get any attack within my territory, I'm not going to be able to have the resources to investigate it. So that's when I really changed from being reactive and responsive, because that was sort of how we did things back in the day, to being proactive and preventive. So that's when we started the Cyberhood Watch program, where we went out to different sectors, and it started with the transportation sector. And we went out and we started talking to the IT people, the investigators, law enforcement, the attorneys, because the attorneys were like, wait a minute, what do you mean you want to share information? And we convinced them to share information with each other. And even though they were competitors in a way, and then we actually went out to different industries that were competitors, they were able to share different pieces of malware to keep their own systems safe. And really, that's kind of evolved to, instead of just a Cyberhood Watch program in Los Angeles, it's evolved nationwide, because the only way that we're going to be proactive when it comes to preventing ourselves from being attacked in a cyber attack, if we share information, then that's going to make everybody stronger, and it's going to be harder for the adversaries to attack us.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I can't imagine anything more valuable for instance, the studio system, all of the studios to interact to create something like that, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny because they told us at headquarters it'll never happen, because no one's ever going to share information. So the very first meeting we had, and we had everybody in the room, that was back in the day, remember when we got to have meetings in person, everyone just sat there and looked at each other. And then, we said, okay, well, we have this super secret portal that you can put the information in. It'll be anonymous. Nobody will know. And then the next time we went, you get a lot of cyber people together, and they like to start talking shop. So they started talking to each other. And then it turned out that more people were sharing the information in person than they were sharing it in the portal. So that's how, people started to trust each other and recognize that if we're all safe, that's the better scenario than as if, only few of us are safe, because we're all going to get hit eventually anyway.
Yeah. In looking into your background, it's probably the most interesting thing to me was your journey through leadership style, basically defining your leadership style, all the way from boot camp in the Army to authentic leading. Could you go through that?
Sure. So the first leader that I got to see in action was my mother. And my parents got divorced when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. My mom wound up going into real estate. And, for someone, with 2 kids at home who needed to be fed, for someone like that who needed to make a living and go to a commission-based industry, it was pretty scary. And so I saw her courage going through that. And in her first year, she wound up selling, and this was back in the day when houses were about $25,000 a piece. She made the $1 million club in the first year that she was in real estate. So I saw that, and I was never brought up, with a glass ceiling type scenario. I didn't even know what that was until I heard somebody talk about it during the Army. But when I went into the Army and then going into the FBI, since there were so few women, the majority of my role models were men. And so I would adopt my leadership skills or my leadership styles from the different men. And it didn't necessarily they weren't my skills, they were somebody else's skills. And so it wasn't until I became in charge of cyber and computer forensics in LA, and I had this lead from the front leadership style that I learned in the military and in the FBI. And I had all these cyber geniuses, and I had no technical skills. And so when it was time for me to lead from the front, I would look around and I wouldn't have anybody following me. So that was really a moment for me to think, okay, how am I going to contribute? You know, if I don't have these cyber skills, how do I contribute as a leader? And then that's when my entire leadership style changed from a lead from the front leader to a servant leader. And it was my job to get my folks everything they needed to do their jobs. And then I looked at what am I good at? Okay, how can I contribute? I was really good at communication. I was really good at finding the money trees back at headquarters because I had just come from there. So I knew how to get money. And if you buy equipment for cyber people, you know, they're going to be super happy. I was really good at solving problems. I was really good at building things. And so little by little, you know, whenever they needed anything, and I would have to sit back because I was told on the third day, you know, Gina, you really don't need to call us every day. You know, we'll call you if there's a problem. So that gave me some time to really think, you know, how can I contribute? And that's how my leadership style changed. And that's how I really started leading authentically, because I use my problem solving skills and my communication skills, all the things that I'm good at, I used those. And that is what made me probably the best leader that I had ever been, because I was I led authentically.
And you let your subordinates basically own it.
Absolutely. That is the key. Everybody, if you want high morale and high productivity, you need to be a leader that allows your people to own the mission. And I essentially gave the mission to my people. I had squad supervisors, and they always used to want to buy stuff. And we only had a finite budget. So at one point, this is after I built trust with them, I said, okay, I no longer want to be in charge of the budget. I've been in charge of the budget for a long time. Now all 7 of you are in charge of the budget. And they're like, well, wait a minute, you know, that's not, well, how do we do that? It's like, figure it out. And so by giving them that authority where they're in charge, it's their program and everybody has ownership, people are going to want to come to work every day because their voices are heard and their ideas are heard and people are being recognized for the good work that they do. So everywhere I go, when it comes to my career, I always want to make sure that people have ownership, because that's how you're going to become the best. The best at anything is when you have a group of people who are on the same team, in the same boat, moving in the same direction. That's how you achieve excellence.
And you did mention that it allows you allowed them to make mistakes, which is important.
Absolutely. In fact, as I was in that position for 11 years, so probably about halfway through, I decided, you know what, I want my people to make mistakes. I don't want, because when I was a new leader, I felt, and as a woman, I felt I had to do everything perfectly in this male dominated field. So I put so much pressure on myself to be perfect that not only would I not allow myself to make mistakes, but I wouldn't let my people make mistakes. And that's not a good work environment for anybody. So I would get a brand new squad supervisor that was newly promoted, and I would give them a project that was bigger than what they could handle. And that would cause a little stress for them. But the reason why I did it is because I knew they weren't going to do it perfectly, and it would give them the opportunity to learn through their mistakes. And as long as nobody was killed and we weren't wasting any tax dollar money, I gave them that opportunity to learn how to do things. And really, when you fail at something, that's when you learn the most. And so if they wanted to go down a rabbit hole, I would give them subtle clues. And so my older supervisors, whenever I would do that, they're like, wait, what am I missing? You know, so they figured me out. But the young ones, they wanted to just hard charge, and they figured it out. And I wish that I had been given that opportunity as a new leader, instead of beating myself up every time I made a mistake.
Yeah, you know, in the startup world, business startup world, we have a saying, fail early, fail often, but always fail forward.
Yes.
And who was it? Edison said, I haven't failed. I found 10,000 ways that don't work. So So, I mean, we learn more from failure than we do from success, frankly.
I
Correct.
think so. And when I speak to women and when I speak to girls about failing, or going out and being bold and not waiting for someone to tell you that you're ready. Because so many times, I've noticed with my male young squad supervisors, they'd be willing to put in for any job. And they may or may not be qualified. And yet the women, they felt that they had to be overqualified before they would put into a job. So I was always pushing my people to step outside of their comfort zones, because again, that's where excellence is born, is when you're
Right.
stepping outside of your comfort zone. And you may fail, but it's okay. But once people learn that it's okay to fail, then they're not afraid of it.
Yeah. And I think I've heard you say that you feel that women feel they have to be absolutely 100% perfect.
Yes.
And that's not
Yeah.
necessarily true.
Yeah, women need to learn how to understand how to fake it till you make it, And I say that in a way only because, so when you're a leader and you don't know what you're doing, your people know. I mean, you're not going to fake it for anybody, because they're going to know that you don't know what you're doing. But when you go into it and you say, hey, look, I don't know what this is. I'm going to learn it, and I am going to help you do whatever it is that you need to do your job. You shouldn't have an insecurity that you don't know something as a leader. I mean, learn from the best and learn, and it's okay. I'm in a job now. I am the chief safety officer for LA Metro. I have no transportation experience whatsoever, and yet they didn't hire me because of any sort of experience in transportation. They hired me because I have leadership skills. So really, the higher we go in our lives, in that, the corporate world or the public world, whatever, it's all based on leadership. It's less based on skills the higher you go than it is on leadership.
You said before we started this, you said that you can't use the lead from behind tactic in your new job, correct?
That's true. I am back to being a lead from the front leader. It's a hard charging area. We have a lot of safety challenges when it comes to public transportation. And so based on my skills and my experience in law enforcement, so I am using my technical skills, my law enforcement skills in this scenario where I am leading from the front, because I do have those skills.
Yeah.
So I think really to be the best leader, you have to really kind of understand, what do your people respond to? What do they need? And I don't think this generation of 20-something-year-olds, they don't want to be told what to do. They want to be engaged, and they want to be heard, because we have this little thing called social media where they're heard every day, or they think they're heard every day. So we really have to recognize what motivates people, and then, accommodate them with a leadership style that's going to get the most out of them.
Right. And in terms of authentic leading, I think one of the most interesting things is the advice you give to young women is you don't have to give up your femininity. I mean, basically, authentic leading is being yourself and
Right.
using a lot of your innate skill sets, correct?
Yes, no, absolutely. I have been a girly girl my entire life. I was a Barbizon School of Modeling graduate circa 1979, I think it was. And this is what you get. And this is what I've always been. When I was in the military, I would wear red lipstick with my battle dress uniform, which was totally and completely against the rules. And I had a first sergeant in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, when I was going through school, who would hunt me down every morning to see if I had red lipstick on. And I would, and I'd do about 100 push-ups every day to accommodate my red lipstick situation. But yeah, I think that we can't change who we are, because when we do, again, that's not going to be authentic, and you're not going to be an authentic leader if you don't lead authentically, right? So I would say to anyone is just be who you are, whatever you have, whatever skills you have, that's who you are. That's how you lead. That's all part of the package. And me wearing high-heeled shoes and pencil skirts and silk blouses, because I saw my mom do that. She used to wear silk blouses, velour pants and slingback heels to real estate work every day. So that's who I learned it from. And still to this day, that's what I do.
It's interesting, when J. Edgar Hoover was head of FBI, there was no glass ceiling, it was a glass building, frankly. And
Yeah.
a lot of people have thought it's because they didn't allow women in because they didn't want any fashion competition. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm just saying that. So women weren't allowed to be FBI agents during my lifetime. So I
Hmm.
think they started letting, when he died, that's when they started letting women in, like 72 or 73. And so that was really interesting. When I got in 1996, the first generation of women were my training agents. And I just got to hear their stories. And one of my training agents, her name is Colleen McKay, and she passed away a few years ago. But she was a police officer back in the 60s. And so she told stories about how back in the 60s, the women had desk jobs, and then the men would go out on patrol. And then one day they decided, hey, we're going to let the women go out on patrol. But they didn't have uniform pants for women. The women back in the 60s were wearing mini skirts, at their desk jobs. And so she had to go out and do patrol in a mini skirt with her gun in her purse. So I love hearing those stories because those are the women who paved the way for me. And that makes me want to pave the way for the women who are coming behind me as well. So I always thank the women who came before me for making it easier for me going through.
Yeah, I've heard you say that you felt that the glass ceiling is really an artificial obstacle.
I think people, this is a hot topic for a lot of people. There is discrimination. I recognize that. But the more we allow ourselves to believe why we can't succeed, I think that that's a bad thing. I don't think we should put any more obstacles than we already put in our way. So when I hear young women these days, tell me about a glass ceiling or even say anything like that, I think to myself, of all the women who came before them, so that they didn't have to think about that. But if it's something that we continue to think, it's our own faults for continuing that within our own heads. So how we talk to each other in our head, the things that we say to ourselves, the negative self-talk, all of that is what's holding us back. And if you add, believing in a glass ceiling to all of that, we're just setting ourselves up for failure. If you believe you can achieve, if you can believe, it may not be the direct path to where you want to go. Like me, I thought going into the CIA was going to be, what my destiny was. But you have to take a couple, rights or lefts or U-turns sometimes in order to get to where you're best. And so that's why I tell people, just be careful what you say to yourself, because you hear yourself more than anybody else in your entire life. And if you're kind to yourself and you give yourself grace, and you help yourself get to where you want to be versus beat yourself up whenever you have a setback, it's all a mindset shift. And that's what I highly recommend for anybody who's stuck somewhere, is to get unstuck, change your thinking and your thought process.
Absolutely. Well, you've had an incredible career. I think you retired in 2018, is it? And then you've been basically wrapped up all of these experiences into a package that you've been presenting as a coach, talking about crisis, chaos, and change. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, leading through chaos, crisis, and change. I love giving that presentation because there are so many things, obstacles that we set up for ourselves. For example, chaos. I think this is what I say every day. We are what we tolerate. And if I tell people to write a list of the things that we're tolerating, and it could be anything from the boxes that we have in the garage that need to be unpacked, or the leaky faucet in the kitchen, all the way up to dysfunctional relationships. And if we just make a list of all of the things that we tolerate and we start to get rid of those things, the less chaos that we're going to find in our life. So you unpack the boxes, the next time you drive into the garage, you pull into the garage, you're going to have this sense of relief. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to do that anymore. I walk into the kitchen. Oh, I don't have to worry about the leaky stuff, faucet anymore. So the more space that we allow ourselves, whenever that one chaotic thing crashes into our life, we're not going to fall into, crisis. Too much chaos creates crisis. So if we want to get rid of the chaos in our lives, let's get rid of the things that we're tolerating. And that starts with creating boundaries. That's one thing going into this new job. I talk about creating boundaries all the time, but we have to teach people how we want to be treated. And you do it from the beginning, but unfortunately, we're in relationships. We're all in relationships where we didn't do that. So we really have to set up boundaries and make sure that people know this is how I want to be treated. And this is what my expectations are. And then that's going to also give us space. So we're not dealing with all that dysfunction in a relationship. And I also tell people to nip things in the bud. Whenever somebody says something or does something to you, I always say, give them the finger. And it's not that finger, it's this finger. And have a talk about it, because how many times, especially as women, does someone say something in front of the boss about us or embarrass us, or something is said, and then we internalize it, and then we get mad about it, and then we call our friends and we tell them about it, and then we can't sleep because we're plotting that person's demise. Instead of just going up to that person after and pulling them aside and say, what did you mean by that? And it doesn't have to be confrontational. It's just a question. Hey, yeah, what you said, what'd you mean by that? And then 9 out of 10 times, it's not going to be anything malicious. It's like, oh, I was just kidding, or this, that, or the other. But it doesn't matter, because you're putting that person on notice on, this is how I expect you to treat me.
I think going along with that, I think Ethel McGuire, I think she was the sheriff of in Westminster.
No, no. It was Sandra Hutchins. Sandra
All right,
Hutchins
and
was the first female sheriff in Orange County.
That's right. And she gave you a little lesson in terms of taking things personally.
Oh, sure. Yes. So we interviewed her. I had 2 podcasts. One is called Behind the Crime Scene, and the other is called Lead Like a Lady. And during our Behind the Crime Scene podcast, we interviewed her. And Sandra Hutchins was, she had 40 years in law enforcement. And when she became the first sheriff in Orange County, what a huge role model she was. Even before that, when she was at the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And she was always calm, cool, and collected. And I would always watch her from afar, because I just loved to see how she conducted herself in this male-dominated field. And so she had a variety of different issues while she was the sheriff. People had broken out of the Orange County jail, and she had to deal with that. And so after we interviewed her and all of her experiences, we asked her, do you ever take anything personally? And she said, oh, yes, and we laughed, because we thought, oh, she would never take anything personally. But she says, I don't let it get in the way of doing my job. And that is just so important. When we take things personally, it's probably the most selfish thing that we could possibly do, because all of a sudden everything becomes about us. And, either we become this, victim of, oh, my woe is me, look what happened. And it's just taking all of the energy out of what we could be doing, which is doing our job, doing it well, and getting the promotions that we deserve. So the more we take things personally and let it stop us, it's just like thinking, okay, there's a glass ceiling and I can't make it to the top because there's a glass ceiling. By taking things personally and using all of that energy to internalize something that may or may not even be true, just set it aside and keep moving forward.
We have a lot of business leaders who tune into our webcasts and our webinars, and I know that there's a number of them who are interested in the cybersecurity aspect. And I think that there's a significant amount of advice you could give, but what do you think the weakest link is in terms of cybersecurity?
The weakest link in cybersecurity is you and me and our workforce. We are all the weakest link, because all it takes is one person to click on a link on a work computer, and your entire network is compromised, or it could possibly happen. I know a lot of companies do penetration tests, and they're very proud that only 10% of their workers clicked on that $5 Starbucks card. But if 10% of your workforce is allowing an adversary into your system, then you've got a really, really, really big problem. So I believe that cybersecurity starts with our workforce, and it starts from the CEO all the way down. And it has to be something that is everyday, because cybersecurity isn't an IT problem, it's a business problem. And every employee needs to recognize that if we have a catastrophic attack against our company, people may not have jobs anymore. So that's when people start to perk up and say, okay, what do I need to do? And again, giving that ownership to the workforce, and maybe even coming up with recognition for people who did certain things to be more secure or what have you. I think it needs to be more than just the twice a year or once a year training. It needs to be an everyday event where people are reminded that cybersecurity safety begins with you.
And the protocols are really critical too, as people move around in a company, right?
Absolutely. Business email compromise is probably $1 billion a year loss worldwide. And that's when the adversary will target the financial people. And when you think about, how much information am I sharing on LinkedIn? How much information am I sharing on any other social media, Facebook or Twitter or what have you? Those people who are targeting, doing the social engineering, they're looking at everything that you put out there. If you love underwater basket weaving, that's your thing. They're going to send you an underwater basket weaving email and say, hey, click on this or whatever. So, they're getting very, very good at what they do. And with business email compromise, they'll target the financial folks, and they'll put them in a situation where an email comes in looking like it's from the boss, telling them to transfer, $5 million overseas and hurry up because the bank's closing within the next 20 minutes. And then they ship the money out, and they lose the money because the banks aren't reimbursing for those losses. So it's really important to have the protocols in place, especially when it comes to your financials, that everybody knows that this is the protocol that we use to send money, and never do we have these emergencies coming up where we expect you to do anything.
I know you're a major evangelist for the FBI. I was wondering what's the most rewarding thing looking back in your career? What do you think is the most rewarding thing that you can point to?
The most rewarding thing for me, probably, when I look back, I made a lot of arrests. I love my Westminster time. I still am friends with Tommy Ratcliffe. In fact, we went on a great vacation with he and his wife a couple of years ago. But I would say when I look back on my career, what was most gratifying was developing the leaders that came up behind me. I think, here you have these young cyber 30-somethings. We have absolutely nothing in common. And yet, watching them grow and make mistakes and become great leaders and move on to great positions. I had my first female cyber supervisor. I got her 10 years in. So I had never had a female cyber supervisor up until she showed up. And I remember when she showed up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never had a female supervisor before. And I would call her into my office and sit her on my couch, and I would try to pump her head in, with all of the knowledge that I have of being a woman in law enforcement and a male-dominated career and all of these things. And she was young, she was in her early 30s, and she would roll her eyes and it's like, Mom, can I go back to work now? That type of a thing. But when she wound up getting my job, someone else got it after I left, and then she got it after that person left. And then when she calls me, that's like one of the biggest thrills that I have, is to just hear from her and have her ask me questions or hear how she's doing, because that's my legacy. That's what I feel my legacy is having that opportunity to plant seeds and watch them grow.
Right. Being a woman in the FBI, and with all of the assignments you've had both in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and in the FBI, seems like you'd be a great subject for a movie or a documentary or something like that. Has anybody ever suggested that to you?
Gosh, well, I always wanted to be a writer myself. And that was one thing that when I left the FBI, that was one of the things that I did, is I created different ideas for television shows, and I'm writing a movie right now. So I think I would like to be the one to write my own movie, because I'm going to remember it in a different way probably, and make it far more exciting than it actually was. But yeah, so I do love to write, and I'm working on a movie right now. And yeah, it's being creative. That's something that I guess I was very creative in the FBI, but this gives me like a lot of creativity that I get to use every day. So I enjoy doing that.
That's great. Do you have any takeaways? We always ask our speakers if they have three potential takeaways. For instance, any additional tips for women in who are entering a male-dominated field like in technology or whatever. Do you have any?
I would say my favorite quote. It's an Albert Einstein quote, and I'm going to modify it. She who attempts the absurd can achieve the impossible. And I live that every day. I love it when people tell me, oh, you can't do that, or that can't be done, because it's like, it gets me going. And I want to show that, yeah, it can be done. So just think outside of the box. And I love Sheriff Hutchins. She always says, dare, step out of your comfort zone and don't wait for somebody to tell you that you're ready. I think we're ready, whether we think we're ready or not. So just try it. And if you fail, you fail. But you'd be surprised that when you're kind of out there in that absurdity zone, that amazing things can happen. That's how miracles happen, is when you're operating in the absurd zone that, hey, I can do this, and maybe you get a different outcome and maybe you achieve it. You never know unless you try. So I would say go out there and venture into the absurd and see what you can get out of it.
I'd like to share a little bit more information on your podcast. So here is her podcast, Lead Like a Lady, featuring remarkable women at the top of their games who also know what it's like to be the only woman in the room. It's available on your favorite podcast providers. And you can also connect with Gina on LinkedIn. And below you'll see the LinkedIn link. Our next speaker is Josh Freed. Josh Freed is an award-winning documentarian and filmmaker from Canada who contacted me last year to help him produce a new documentary for the nature of things. Now, to say that that's a long-running show on Canadian Broadcasting Company is an understatement. It's the most successful series in the history of Canadian TV since 1960. This particular episode, In Your Face, is about something that's become more important than ever with the advent of augmented reality and the metaverse, and that's facial recognition. This episode delves into how facial recognition has become ubiquitous in society and how privacy today is really nothing more than an illusion. We get into law enforcement, national security, social media, and medicine. And while the documentary dealt with the whole spectrum of issues around facial recognition, Josh asked me to help him in creating a mobile application for a woman chaplain in Toronto who suffers from a condition called prosopagnosia. It's otherwise known as face blindness. No matter what she did, she could not recognize her congregants. And as you might imagine, that can be a real problem, especially when you're in a situation where you are the confidant and you're supposed to care about these people a lot. Brad Pitt, Steve Wozniak, Jane Goodall, Oliver Sacks, a neurologist, and many others have this condition, including myself. And Josh heard about me because of my background in doctorate of neuroscience, but specifically because I suffer from a condition. And I created an app that resolves the handicap using biometrics. So I think you'll find this a very interesting presentation. And we're going to show clips from the documentary during the entire thing. It's fascinating. Again, I really want to thank Gina for being here. And again, if you want to reach Gina, you can do that on LinkedIn, or you can contact me. My email is below. So I want to thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope to see you all in April. Thank you.